Hello everyone, and you're very welcome to today's session for the Digital T-Levels. We will be providing you with a comprehensive overview of this qualification, including the core component and the occupational specialism delivery. The plan for today is to have a high-level overview of the T-Levels and the different components. Then we'll look at the specification content and how it will be assessed. This will include the core and occupational specialism assessments, how you could structure your content delivery, as well as sharing some ideas you could use during your delivery. And finally, we'll have a look at the resources and support available. But first, just a quick introduction. So my name is David Kiernan, and I work in the provider development team at NCFE. And I support providers with the delivery of our qualifications, so the structure, the assessments, and anything related to teaching and learning. My direct email is shown, but if I'm unavailable, then please use our general provider development email address. So we're going to begin with the high-level overview of the T-levels. So what are T-levels? T-levels are a level 3 two-year program aimed at 16 to 19-year-olds, and they've been designed around 11 occupational routes, and they are equivalent in size, rigor, and depth to 3 A-levels, and also attract UCAS points. T-levels are owned by the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, or IFATE, and the design and content of the T-levels came from employer panels in the relevant industries. And because of these employer panels, T-levels do offer students a route to paid employment. And UCAS points, as I mentioned, are also available for the completion of a T-level, so students can progress on to higher education or onto a higher level apprenticeship. The entire design of the T-levels is to ensure that students have the threshold competency needed for the relevant occupational role. So these bold bullet points are the 11 occupational routes that T-levels have either been developed for or will be developed for. And these are the routes identified by the Sainsbury's report. And the sub-bullet points, they are called the pathways. So these are the T-levels available from NCFE. And as you can see, NCFE offers 2 of the digital pathways. 2 of the pathways available from the digital T-level route. And those pathways that we offer are digital business services and digital support services. NCFE are also developing T-levels as well for hair and beauty and the creative and design route too. Now, this is a summary of the general structure of a T-level program. The awarding organization is responsible for the technical qualification, or TQ, and for the assessments. And this is composed of the core content for the T-level pathway and the occupational specialism content for that T-level pathway. But there are other requirements to obtain a full T-level, beginning with an industry placement, which is a minimum of 315 hours. And some of other requirements, such as license to practice qualifications, being registered with a professional body, etc. Our digital T-levels don't have any of these requirements, though. Previously, there was also an exit requirement, which required students to have a level 2 or GCSE grade 4 in English and maths. This has been changed, and this exit requirement is no longer part of the T-levels. From a teaching and assessment perspective, you can consider the 2 headings of core content and occupational specialism content. The core component consists of both knowledge content and skills content, both of which must have been delivered to your students before they can sit the core assessments. Now, some of the knowledge content is common to all the digital T-levels. This is called the root content. And some digital T-levels might have additional content specifically needed for that pathway. An example of this is with digital support services, and we will discuss that later today. Then there's the skills content, which is pathway specific, although you may see some similarities in the skills for the different pathways. Now, when all of the core component has been delivered to your students, then they can sit the 2 assessment subcomponents, for the knowledge content and the skills content. The knowledge content is assessed via 2 exam papers, and the skills assessed by a scenario-based project. Students will have to apply their knowledge and demonstrate their skills during this project, which has been developed with employers to make the tasks as occupationally realistic as possible. Hence its title of Employer Set Project. This assessment is conducted at your centre and forms no part of the industry placement. Then we have the occupational specialism component, which also consists of knowledge content and skills content to be delivered to your students. Now, this is assessed via synoptic assignments. So all of the occupational specialism content would need to be delivered to your students before they can do these assignments. So it's important to take the dates for these assessments into consideration when timetabling your delivery. There's one other part of the technical qualification that I want to highlight, which is the General Competency Framework. This lists the English, Maths, and digital skills competencies that students will also be taught. Again, the focus is for students to have that threshold competency for the occupational role. These competencies are assessed and are also already embedded within the specification, but it would be useful to identify opportunities to develop these further with your students. So before we get into the specifics, just going to show you where to find the relevant information and resources for these T-levels. qualhub.co.uk will be your primary source for information. You can search for the qualification code, subject area, or just type digital T-level. And there will be a range of suggested qualifications, or you can see the full search results. As an alternative though, you could click on qualifications at the top, and this will show you all of our qualifications that are available. And you can then filter for T-levels in the features menu. So from the full qualification section of Qualhub, the actual subject Qualhub pages, on there, the most important document you will find is going to be the specification. You will also find sample assessment materials, past papers, and teaching materials within there as well. This page will be continuously updated as more resources and materials become available. We're now going to look at the specific content for the digital T-level and how the assessments will work. The core component consists of both knowledge content and skills content, as I mentioned earlier. And this is what the majority of providers had as their year 1 focus, delivering the core content. And there are 12 core root knowledge elements, with an additional 3 elements for those doing the digital support services. So those first 12 are common to digital business services and digital support services, but digital support services also has 3 additional elements, namely careers within the digital support services sector, communication in digital support services, and fault analysis and problem resolution. Then there are the core skills, which students would need to be able to demonstrate. So the core skills do differ depending on which pathway you are doing. So the skills for digital business services will be different from the digital support services T-level skills. And again, different if you are also delivering the digital production design and development T-level. Now, this core content, though, does help to lay the foundation that the occupational specialism content is built upon, which has been the focus of year 2 for our providers, for the majority of them. And these are the occupational specialisms that are currently available, with digital infrastructure, network cabling, and digital support being available to those doing the digital support services pathway. And there is also a cybersecurity occupational specialism currently in development. And the other occupational specialism is data technician, which is available from the digital business services pathway. Each occupational specialism has got performance outcomes. each of which indicates the knowledge and skills required to enable students to achieve threshold competency in the chosen occupational specialism. The 3 specialisms available from digital support services all have 3 performance outcomes, while the data technician specialism for digital business services has 6 performance outcomes. There is additional specification teaching content for each of these performance outcomes. And again, it's also divided into knowledge content and skills content. Now, just like the specification is divided into core content and occupational specialism content, so are the assessments. The core component assessments is made up of 2 subcomponents. 2 exam papers, which are designed to assess the student's knowledge, and an externally set skills assessment called the employer set project. So called, as I mentioned earlier, because the tasks have been developed in conjunction with employers to make them as realistic as possible. The core assessments will be available in the summer and autumn terms, with the employer set project in May and November, and the exam papers in June and December. When students sit the core assessments for the very first time, they need to sit both subcomponents in the same assessment series. This way, all of the core content can be assessed together. For example, the employer set project and the exam papers in the summer of year 1. So for the first attempt, it's not possible to sit the exam papers only in the summer and then the employer set project in the autumn. Both need to be taken together when it's the first sitting. For retakes, however, that can be the exam papers only or the employer set project only, which I will mention more about later. The core assessments are graded A star to E and U or ungraded. The exam papers address the knowledge content, with paper A assessing the 6 elements shown, and paper B assessing the remaining elements. For those delivering digital support services, paper B will have an additional section that will assess the 3 pathway elements. The exams can be taken as traditional paper-based assessments, or an on-screen option is available too. And do consider what is best for your students. And you will find sample papers and the very recent Summer 22 papers on QualHub. And there is also an example of what an on-screen assessment would look like. Both digital paper A's are 2 hours long, but for paper B, digital business services is 2 hours and digital support services is 2.5 hours. This is due to that additional pathway content in digital support services. The exam papers will consist of a mix of multiple choice questions, short answer questions, and extended response questions. The papers are designed to assess these 3 assessment objectives. Assessment Objective 1, or AO1, which is about the recall and demonstration of knowledge. AO2, which is about applying their knowledge to different scenarios, situations, contexts, etc. And the highest demand objective is AO3, being able to analyze and evaluate. Some exam questions might be brand new scenarios or situations that you've not explicitly taught the students, but they would still possess the required knowledge to use for that question and that situation. Then we have the employer set project. And we'll begin by looking at the employer set project for digital business services. The employer set project, or ESP for short, occurs during a 2-week window, which begins in May for the summer series and in November for the autumn series. This particular employer set project has pre-release materials, which should be issued to the students 3 weeks before the assessment window opens. This is to give students a chance to familiarize themselves with the sector focus of the brief and any other relevant information, such as researching e-commerce and the economy, for example. This would also be checked by tutors to ensure it meets the requirements, such as being on 4 pages, Arial font 12, etc. Task 1 is about using the information in the brief to make project considerations and potential risks, production of flow charts or Gantt charts, etc. Task 2A is about what steps might be taken next. For example, it might be explaining the type of data you would require to meet the needs of the brief, where you could source the data, what you would do with that data, and why you think those actions would be beneficial. Task 2B is about handling the data, cleansing it, analyzing it, transforming the data into a meaningful output, etc. And there may be other supporting documents needed, for example, an entity relationship diagram. Task 3 is about communicating ideas to different audiences, technical and non-technical audiences, which is achieved via the production of a presentation. Task 4 is a reflective evaluation, in which students consider the project and how well it went, and how well they met the needs of the brief. For digital support services, there are actually two employer set project options. There's a digital support employer set project, and there's also a network cabling and digital infrastructure employer set project. Now, the types of tasks are similar for both employer set projects, as they are both assessing the same core skills, but there might be some different evidence requirements between the employer set projects. Now, neither of these employer set projects have any pre-release materials for the students, but providers, you will be given information early to allow you to do any system configurations in order to replicate faults. Now, you would need to configure those systems as mentioned to replicate the fault, and the evidence that students would produce for this task can include a troubleshooting document, test plan document, and maybe some other documents, such as a firewall configuration document if you were doing the network cabling and data infrastructure employer set project. Task 2A is about gathering information in order to make recommendations or solutions for the issues in the brief. And this task kind of has three components to it. Research and prepare questions for an interview. Then there's a 10-minute interview, which is audio recorded with the tutor playing the role. And then writing emails following that interview, for example, to the team leader with a summary of the questions, responses, and issues identified. Then we get on to task 3, which is the production of a project proposal. Any other requested documents might be asked for too, like a network diagram, if it was for the network cabling and data infrastructure employer set project. And then we have task 4, which is also an evaluation, with the production of a satisfaction survey and a post-project review document. Now, shown on screen right now is the weighting breakdown of the two core assessment subcomponents. Students are allowed to resit, and it will be their best grade that carries forward. With retakes, students can either sit the employer set project only, the exam papers only, or resit both. If they do need to resit the exam papers though, then it would include both exam papers. So it's not possible just to resit one paper, such as paper A only, for example. It must be both papers. Results from both the exams and employer set project will be aggregated to give an overall core grade, which is A star to E and U. Now, the very first sitting of these core assessments has just happened this summer, 2022. And here are the grade boundaries for the exam subcomponent and the employer set project subcomponent. For easiness, I just converted the raw mark required in the assessment into a rounded percentage. So looking at digital business services, we can see that 33% was needed to be answered correctly in order to obtain an E grade in the exams, with 36% needed for the employer set project. Do remember that grade boundaries can change from one assessment series to another. So these may not be the same grade boundaries for the upcoming autumn or summer series, but it should hopefully serve as a useful guide when it comes to measuring students' performance. Now, the chosen occupational specialism, or OS, will be assessed through a series of synoptic assignments, which have been designed to be as occupationally realistic as possible and are externally set by NCFE. There are specific conditions that a task must be undertaken, which can be found in our provider guides, such as supervised sessions or maybe more formal exam conditions, and even the evidence such as maybe video or audio recordings of certain tasks, etc. Now, where the core assessments were graded from A star to E, these assignments are graded distinction to ungraded. The retake rules for the synoptic assignments is the same as those for the core assessments. So there is unlimited retakes, although for the occupational specialism, that obviously would be very difficult to schedule just during 2 years. But any retakes the students do, they have 2 years after completing the T level to do any retakes. So any retakes must be completed within 2 years after completing the T level. And when it comes to retakes of the synoptic assignments, it's not possible to choose a single assignment or task to retake. You would need to retake all of the assignments, which we will look at now. For the data technician occupational specialism, so part of the digital business services T level, there is one assignment which has been broken into 4 tasks, but each task can contain some subtasks, such as task 1A, task 1B, etc. For the first task, students will research and write a proposal based on the brief. For example, it could be regarding smart home device market, maybe considering the demographic of smart home device users, how the devices are used, the forecast for these devices, etc. Students will also have to analyze data sets provided by NCFE and consider their appropriateness, and the impact of any laws or policies or regulations in relation to the data, such as GDPR or the Data Protection Act 2018. In task 2, students will be given further data and they will need to process it, cleanse, validate, etc. this data and actually perform some analysis too. Students will need to merge data sets together and log their process and decision making throughout task 2. For task 3, students will identify trends and patterns in the data using statistical tests and keep a log containing decisions about selected data to represent insights and how it relates to the client's brief. And for task 4, students are to create a presentation, drawing conclusions and showcasing their results. Students must also explain and justify any key insights they have identified, any trends or interesting patterns that appear in the data, etc. The digital support services has got 3 occupational specialisms, so therefore there are 3 different sets of assignments. The occupational specialism has got 3 assignments, but the assignments are subdivided into different tasks as well. So assignment 1 is about planning and designing, such as a new building needing required hardware that will provide a very robust network. And evidence can include a project plan, flow or Gantt charts, considering legal or regulatory requirements, creating diagrams and technical proposals, etc. Then we have assignment 2 is about developing a test system for the reason given in the brief, such as testing the compatibility of a planned backend server update with the existing backend systems. And this is also going to include practical tasks such as cable creation and the installation and configuration of a new test system used to simulate a network. The final assignment is all about risk assessment and mitigating these risks. So the tasks can include aspects like a risk assessment document, a security policies document, business continuity and/or recovery documents, system reconfiguration screenshots, etc. So that is for the digital infrastructure. For the digital support occupational specialism, the first assignment is about the preparation involved in configuring a network, and then installing and configuring that network. The second assignment is about dealing with job requests, including prioritizing and justifying these choices and taking appropriate action. Students will also create instructional documents for users. For example, documents relating to carrying out a display screen equipment workstation assessment, as an example. The final assignment is about the monitoring, maintenance, and demonstrating continuous improvement of a network, such as the creation of an infrastructure status log and deploying an image remotely, which can be evidenced with annotated screenshots or photographs, depending if you're using virtual machines or physical machines, and documented notes showing the creation and deployment of an image. Then we have network cabling, which also has 3 assignments subdivided into different tasks. Assignment 1 is designing a new network and network diagram that meets the requirements of the brief. So this can include the production of a network design specification, a diagram of the physical layout of the proposed installation and network, and any supporting rationale for that layout, screenshots of a logical network diagram demonstrating how the network is configured, and a description of how all the components on the network will work together. Assignment 2 is about installing and testing the cabling system. The students might have to create working cables and install hardware to a standard that will ensure a safe working environment for the end users, come up with a test plan and testing the cabling, such as data transmission capability of the cabling. And the third assignment is about risk assessment and troubleshooting, such as testing cables to find and fix faults, describe how to approach troubleshooting for a proposed installation, and carrying out a risk assessment of a network. Now, we do have sample assignment briefs on QualHub, as well as exemplification materials showing a pass and distinction standards of work for these occupational assignments. When all the assessment components have been completed, you'll be able to use the grading matrix found within the specification. The overall weighting is a 50-50 split between the core component grade and the occupational specialism grade. Let's say a student got a B in the core component and a merit in the occupational specialism. Then the final grade for the technical qualification would be a merit. When students complete all of the mandatory T-level components and complete their full T-level program, they will receive a T-level certificate issued by IFATE. The T-level certificates will outline all of the components they've achieved and the grade they achieved on each part of the technical qualification. Now, where students have not successfully completed all of the components of the T-level program, they can receive a T-level statement of achievement, outlining what the student has achieved. We're now going to have a look at different ways you could plan and structure the delivery of this qualification. But before actually getting into that planning, you'll need to know how much time is needed for delivery. The specification does give guided learning hours, which can be used for, as the name suggests, guidance for how long it will take to teach the content. And do remember that you'll also have 315 hours of placement to fit in over the 2 years as well. So I'm going to show you an example of a 2-year delivery plan, and I want to emphasize the word example delivery plan here. There isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, and you need to ensure that your plan is suitable for your center, your staff, and students. One thing that is important is having a comprehensive initial assessment and induction stage. So you need to ensure that students have all the skills required to start at T-level. Now, we all know that GCSE grades do not always assure skills and knowledge retention. So please plan induction activities in a way that fully assesses your students' starting points and their potential. This assessment and induction period will then inform your student registrations, which generally must be completed between the 1st of September and the 1st of November. And then that's when you might begin as well the delivery of the core content alongside. Now, the first opportunity to sit the core assessments, so the exam papers and the employer step project, will be in this summer term, with results in the August. And this approach is what most providers have gone for, delivering the core content in year one and sitting the assessments, the core assessments at the end of year one. Once the core content is finished, you might actually have some time to begin some of the occupational specialism content. And then beginning year two, you will continue that delivery of the occupational specialism content. You may need to plan for a resit opportunity of the core exams or the employer step project, or maybe even both, with then results being released in March. Then we are on to our final assessment for the technical qualification, which is the occupational specialism, with those assignments beginning in April. There will be another chance for resets again of the core assessments in the summer term, if needed, with the results for those exams and the results for the occupational specialism synoptic assignments being released in August. Now that completes the technical qualification requirements, but students do also need to complete an industry placement lasting that minimum of 315 hours, or approximately 45 days. And this can occur over the entire 2 years of delivery, with single days or half days each week, or maybe in one single block of 45 days, or some combination of the two. But whichever approach is taken, this is something that you should be taking into account with your planning as well, being sure to avoid any assessment windows. Now, as I said, this is just an example delivery plan, so please start to consider what's going to be best for you and what delivery method will work best for your students. And other considerations and all those interdependencies that may be impacted, staff specialisms, availability, etc. When it comes to structuring your delivery and deciding what content to teach and how it should be delivered, what order to deliver it in, etc., there are several approaches you can take. And you might just decide to deliver the content as it is laid out in the specification, delivering one element at a time. However, what you may want to do is to mix up the content instead. Let's say, for example, if you have a member of staff who is really, really good at legislation, then you may want to combine root core element 8 with any other bits of legislation that occur within the content. So root core element 8 is all about legislation. So maybe we could combine the legislation content that appears within root core element 6 on diversity and inclusion. Now, if you did deliver it this way, then you will probably have different teachers delivering different parts of the specification, the areas that they're strongest on. However, one thing that it can be quite easy to overlook is the delivery of the core skills. So do make sure that's planned within the delivery of your content as well. So not just the knowledge content, but that skills coverage as well. Another option that some providers have gone for is to divide the content into themes based around the exam papers. With paper 1, there are 3 sections on that exam paper covering the root core elements 1, 2, 6, 5, 7, and 8. Paper B is divided into 3 sections or 4 sections, depending on whether you're doing digital business services or digital support services. And paper B addresses the root core elements 3 and 4, 10 and 11, and 12, with digital support services having an extra section on their exam paper for the pathway content. And some providers are then having a separate teacher or separate lessons for the core skills delivery or the employer set project prep. So here's an example plan based on that delivery model. Again, I'm using an example of 3 teachers here. So teacher 1 will be delivering the content that will be on paper A, and teacher 2 will be delivering the content that will be on paper B. And then we have the 3rd teacher who is focusing on the skills. But it would be really useful for that teacher to know what knowledge content is actually being delivered in that same week. This way they could contextualize their core skills lessons to that week's relevant content. There are other options, of course, to choose from, and it's even possible to have combined classes for both digital business services and digital support services for the root content. But you'll need to decide what works best for you and your students. The same planning approach can be applied to the occupational specialism delivery too, and you may want to consider options if this is applicable for you, if you're delivering multiple occupational specialisms. So the occupational specialism content for both the digital business services and the digital support services are broken down into these performance outcomes. And at a glance, you might actually notice that performance outcomes 1 and 3 are exactly the same for all of the digital support services occupational specialisms. And if you look at performance outcome 6 for the digital business services data technician, that is the same as performance outcome 3 for the digital support services occupational specialisms of digital infrastructure, network cabling, and digital support. Now, this doesn't mean that the content is exactly the same, but as you can imagine, there are going to be some similarities. And this provides great opportunities to combine groups if you are offering more than one specialism, with maybe a focus on contextualizations based around the job roles within those lessons. And it could also be useful to students to see how different things apply in different scenarios. Let's take the example of delivering multiple digital support services occupational specialisms. So performance outcome 1, the main focus is applying procedures and exploring security measures within an organization and the measures we take to protect data. So as you look across multiple specialisms, you'll see that we use the same kind of techniques regardless, such as preventative, detective, corrective, and deterrent control measures. And as you progress through performance outcome 1, you'll see things like disaster recovery plans. And again, you will know the components of a disaster recovery plan, and that will differ depending on the specialism to do, but the risks that are in that plan, that will change and that can be different. So it's the same when we're looking at threats, vulnerabilities, and mitigations. So as you know, these are always going to be a lot of the same ones regardless of the specialism. But you will find there may be different risks for a network cabler than there are for someone working in digital support. So throughout this outcome, there are a lot of commonalities, but occasionally you will need to differentiate between the 3 specialisms. By sitting down and mapping these out, you will see exactly where you can combine the groups. And I am aware that a couple of colleges are actually starting to look at doing this as well. Now, as you can see on screen there, the example I've included, and you will notice that for digital infrastructure, it is knowledge element 1, 15. But for the other 2 specialisms, it's knowledge 1 for performance outcome 1, bullet point 14. And this shows just some of the slight differences where knowledge might have been added or removed from a specialism. In this example, though, you can see the outcomes are exactly the same, but it's contextualized towards a job role. So infrastructure might be more at looking at threats to a company, technology, or processes, whereas a cabler might be considering risks such as working at height wall points, or wiring. And the digital support, we'll be looking at supporting users with equipment or user access. We're now going to look at some things you could do during your lessons and delivery of the T-level. It's useful to get a sense of students' background when they begin this qualification. And you may want to find out if any of the students have experience of computing or business qualifications. In this way, you could see if there is a common pool of knowledge among the students and perhaps carry out some initial assessments to see how much information they have retained from GCSE, Level 2, etc. Now, this doesn't necessarily need to be extra work for yourself either by writing assessment questions, as you can go onto an awarding organization's website in many cases and just access their past paper questions. As an example, with NCFE's Level 1/2 Technical Award in Business and Enterprise, if you did go onto that QualHub page, you'll be able to access our past paper questions and mark schemes. You may also want to do a skills assessment with your students, such as seeing how skilled they are at using certain functions in Microsoft Excel. How good are they at finding reliable information from reliable sources and being able to identify and even reference sources? Even producing presentations on a particular business aspect could be useful. And if you do decide to do a presentation, then you may actually find the Digital Business Services Employer Set Mark Scheme useful. Use the descriptions and indicative content that's on the mark scheme in relation to the presentation to make a sort of checklist or criteria for students. Ongoing assessment, especially formative assessment, is something that would be useful to plan throughout your delivery. Now, you may be used to this type of planning if you delivered similar academic style qualifications that have terminal assessments. But if you're more accustomed to more vocational courses, where there can be sort of more ongoing coursework assessment that is gradually built up and assessed over time, then this might be quite different for you, as the T levels are assessed only during set assessment dates or assessment windows. So having ongoing assessment can provide you with valuable information on the student's level of knowledge and skills, and allows you the chance to put in any interventions in place. So the first key assessment will be that initial assessment period to determine the student's current level of knowledge, skills, their attributes, and even their capabilities to be successful on a T level. Other assessment points during the year would be up to you. This might be every half term, with an increase in formative assessment activities prior to any assessment windows. Regardless of the time frame you choose, by planning them into your delivery, they will be a focus of your delivery rather than just an after consideration. And I'm just going to mention a few, by all means not all of these, of some formative assessment activities and how you might want to use them or adapt them for T-levels specifically. And obviously, tests and exam style questions are an obvious one. So do go onto the QualHub page, access those assessment materials so that students could get used to the style and look of those questions. Discussion-based activities can really help to allow for peer support and peer learning as well, and also embedding even employability skills development within those too. And practical tasks or role play activities can be very useful as well with assessing that student's skill development, as well as their communication skills, as there is that English competency isn't just limited to written communication, but even verbal communication too. And what might be even more supportive and developmental is using even any case studies or even scenarios to help achieve this. And what you could do as well is get students to suggest their own activities. For example, any particular faults they want to replicate on their systems.
And the last group of bullet points there, just some different online and digital tools that you might find useful for assessing students as well. There is a different wide range of platforms, so Kahoot, Mentimeter, you can do quizzes, polls, questions. The use of forms can be quite useful, so Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, even create questions that will be auto-marked. And one aspect I do like is Flipgrid. So Flipgrid is like a video discussion platform where you could even pose questions for your students. For example, you could display an error message that has appeared on your laptop or computer. Maybe it's a fault you decided to replicate. And all you would do as a teacher is you could make a little video just saying, I've got this fault on my screen, I've got this error message. Reply with a video telling me what steps you would do. And then students have to reply with a video showing exactly what they would do in that particular scenario. And it can be made quite interactive, different filters and so on. Now, the two most effective strategies to improve students' achievement, and this is according to a meta-analysis by Dunlosky, are active recall, such as practice questions or skills-based activities, and spaced repetition, so revisiting or asking questions on a topic after a period of time has passed. So getting students to answer questions from previously covered content periodically can be very, very useful. But again, let's take some of the pressure off you and let's have students devise their own questions. As research has also shown that student-generated questions also have a positive impact on achievement. A quick way of doing this might be to give the students a section of the specification and get them to make AO1, AO2, and AO3 style questions. Now, a quick way of making an AO1 recall style question could be to turn the bold statement in the specification into a question, and then the sub-bullet points being the answers. But it certainly is more challenging to come up with scenarios, but you will actually be surprised with what some students can actually think of. Another couple of examples I've included on here is getting students to do comparisons, or they even have to suggest maybe the best option for what's being described. For example, I've shown on there a situation describing what requirements a business might want, and then students would have to use that information and evaluate it and decide which organization type fits best to those requirements. Now, one thing to note here, I am not part of the assessment team. I am kept separate to them due to a conflict of interest because I work directly with providers such as this. So these suggestions, they are just coming from my perspective as a teacher. Now, an important aspect of the T level is developing students' English, maths, and digital skills competencies. And that has been embedded into every T level with that general competency framework. Another important aspect for the digital T levels is being able to communicate with different audiences. So that idea of communicating with a technical audience or a non-technical audience. You could have students develop these areas by having them produce a leaflet or a presentation or some form of information package. But they have to produce ones for different audiences. So same topic, just different audiences, such as customers versus stakeholders in a business, or even an IT user versus an information for an IT technician, etc. When it comes to the placement, one thing you may want to consider using is a skills booklet to monitor the student's development of certain specification content. This way you can get an idea of the strong areas amongst your students. Now, on screen there is an example of what this booklet might look like. And what I've used is the skills that are given in the digital infrastructure occupational specialism content. But this can also be done for any of the other occupational specialisms as well. This can even be done with the core content too. Again, let's say with digital support services, the pathway element 3 talks about fault analysis tools and their applications to identify problems. And on placement, you get students to note when they've used, let's say, system alerts, activity or error logs, live traces or dashboards, etc. And that I've just taken from the specification content for pathway element 3 for digital support services. And again, you can do the same sort of thing with digital business services too. If you decide to use this approach for the placements, then it will help to give students a bit more responsibility for their learning and development, and giving them an opportunity to reflect as well on the skills and on their placement. You, as a teacher, will have an idea of which skills students might be stronger in or even weaker in as well. And then you can use this information to have some skills-focused lessons or interventions if needed. We're now going to finish off with the resources and support available to you. I'm going to talk through the resources available and in development from NCFE and what some other organizations are doing too. So our content team have developed and made available example schemes of work, and have also developed or continue to develop further teaching resources. For example, they're currently developing resources to help with the delivery of the occupational specialism content. There are essential resources, which will be free of charge, and we also will have additional resources available for a cost. Now, what I've included in there is a link to our learning resources information sheet. This will let you know which sections of specification our essential resources and additional resources will cover. And aside from our resources, HUDR are producing a textbook for the core content of the digital T-levels, which is due to be released toward the end of this month, end of August 2022. STEM Learning, who promote science, technology, engineering, and maths, have also been doing some work on digital T-levels, and they have pulled together some free resources to help with your delivery, which can be accessed via the link shown on screen. On the T-level provider support page, you will find many support and information, but one thing that will also be included there is our upcoming webinars and events. But even if you cannot attend any of our sessions, they will be recorded and previous webinars will be available on our YouTube playlist. The customer support team, they are often your very first line of inquiry for aspects such as registering students, using the portal, accessing resources, etc. And there's also a directed email address, tlevelsupport@ncfe.org.uk. As for me, I'm your contact for support related to teaching and learning, CPD sessions, and the account managers do support centres with the business of delivering T-levels. And centres do find it quite valuable having that singular point of contact. So thank you everyone for viewing today's session. I do hope you have found it useful, and please don't hesitate to contact NCFE should you have any queries. And also from everyone here at NCFE, we would like to wish you a very enjoyable and successful year.